Let's get started. First things first, you need to decide what your purpose is. Why are you making this? Without a solid understanding of the value behind what you're creating, you'll quickly lose motivation. After that, choose 2 or 3 main points that you want to focus on. Now, don't do any more than this. This keeps it manageable and engaging. And don't worry, we can add more later, but to just make it simple to work with in the beginning stages, let's just stick with 2 or 3. And the last thing before we get started is this foundation principle. Now, you're gonna hear me say this a few times. It is, don't distract from the main point. If you keep that in mind, it'll make everything simple and easy to manage as we move on to our next step, the script. Now, the script is the blueprint of your video. Without that, your productions will come across as disjointed, hard to follow. Very quickly, your audience will lose attention, so to avoid that, let's follow this very simple structure. First, insert the 2 or 3 main points that you decided on. After this, break it down into logical segments, whatever you'll need to explain the points. Third, insert only the required details to explain those points. After that, you start to write your dialogue. Now, you want to be careful not to write things out word for word or verbatim, because this can make you come across as robotic or unnatural. Now, I want to give you an example. Over here is the first script that I wrote for this video. As you can see, it is a nightmare, and I eventually stopped not even halfway through. On this side is the script I wrote after following these principles. You can see the difference. It's a lot easier to manage. If you'd like to download a copy of this template, I'll put a link to it down below. Next, you start to refine the script. At this point, you can relocate things. You've got chunks of dialogue, chunks of explanation. Now you can read through, see if it flows. Is this a logical progression? If you need to move stuff, you can quickly copy, paste it somewhere else. And now you got everything just the way that you want it. You can practice that script. Does the dialogue flow? Does it feel natural? Are you repeating words or phrases over and over again? Well, now it's very easy to cut that out of the script. Believe me, you do not want to be worrying about this while you're filming. That is way more frustrating and will absolutely kill your motivation. Let's get rid of it at this level. Now, you can start to get a little creative with the next step, shot planning. Now, planning for your shots is almost as important as the script itself. This keeps your production organized. That organization translates to the viewer. They see that it's quality. Trust me, 10% more work in planning for your shots saves about 50% the time and gives you a few 100% better result. It is worth the effort. So exactly what shots are you gonna need? The main part of your video is probably going to be your narration. This is what we call A-roll. It's the main footage. Any additional footage that you need to back up and support the A-roll, we would call B-roll. And that's what we're going to discuss now, the 2 main types of video that you'll need to capture for your productions. The first of which is emotion. Are you giving a personal expression? Are you trying to reach the audience, have some kind of connection? Well, then most likely, it would be better to show your face and your body language more than anything else. Any additional clips you might need can be kind of blurry, kind of artsy, have a lot of lights, things like that. The next category is information. Now, this is for something like a product review, a walkthrough, or showing some kind of scenery. Take us on that journey. Show, don't tell. The clips that you choose to capture should mostly match the narration. These can be mostly in focus, don't have too much blur, and they're really meant to inform, not to have an emotional impact. But exactly what do you need clips of? When should you introduce them? How long should they be on screen? Well, remembering that basic principle of don't distract from the main point will help you make the right decision. Well, your script is done. Your shots are planned, and now the fun part starts. You're ready to film. Now, this can seem overwhelming, but if you want to go from looking like this to this, here's a few simple steps to follow. For your video, depending on what you want to capture, there's actually quite a lot of options. Some of them are paid. There is a ton of stock media websites on the internet. Plenty of options there. These can be great because they're already professional. You don't need to worry about learning how to do video. Also, this can save you a lot of time. Another option are places like Fiverr. You can hire people to film and produce videos for you. Now, of course, you want to be careful. There are some scams on there. So be sure to ask a lot of questions when you're trying to hire somebody. Also, be very careful that what you buy does not say for personal use only. Make sure it is licensed for commercial use. And of course, always remember, you get what you pay for. You are not gonna get a Hollywood cinematic movie for 50 bucks. But chances are, if you're watching this, you wanna produce it yourself. Fantastic. Let's get started. First, let's talk about the what, and then we'll talk about the how. So what should you capture? I cannot emphasize this enough. Capture only the shots that you wrote down in your plan. Do not get out there and start thinking, oh, that looks good, maybe I'll use that later. I've done it. It's a nightmare. Deleting 90% of the footage that you capture is not fun, wastes a lot of time. So try to set a time limit for yourself while you're filming. If as you're editing you realize that you actually need more, it's okay to go back. Believe me, this actually spends way less time in the long run. And a few great clips are way better than a lot of okay clips. So now for the how. How do you capture all this awesome footage that you plan for? Well, I have good news for you. Most likely, whatever phone or camera you're using can produce quality that is plenty good. You don't need to buy a new camera. 3 things to keep in mind that will greatly increase your quality are lighting, composition, and focal length. We'll discuss them one by one. Lighting is absolutely vital. Now, a basic setup is a 1, 2, or 3-point lighting. 1-point lighting looks dramatic. 2-point lighting is a little bit more inviting. 3-point lighting gives a little more of a cinematic flair. Now you want to avoid flat lighting your subject. This is where the 1st and 2nd point lights are equally as bright. This completely removes dimension and depth from a face. Now all of this still applies if you're filming a product instead of a person. That flat light just looks artificial. What if you don't have studio lights? Well, if you would like some inexpensive beginner lights, there's some in the description below. But if you don't want to buy those, then here's a hack. Use shop lights. Now, shop lights are very inexpensive, you can get them almost anywhere, but they can look very harsh. So what do? Well, just take a few layers of wax paper and attach them to the light. You have an immediate softbox, something to diffuse the light to make it softer. Now, when you're buying bulbs for these lights, try to get something that is daylight or white, about 5,000 Kelvin. This will just make everything look a lot cleaner. And for the last option, a favorite of natural light photographers, the sun. Open the blinds, sit by a window, let the sun do the lighting for you. If you need to bounce some light on the other side of the subject, just get a white poster board. This can give a very soft look to it. And unless your video calls for it for some artistic purposes, generally you'd want to avoid hard backlighting that gives you a really harsh silhouette. This is just hard to see. It's hard to make a connection with the viewer. And now for a bonus tip, it's something that I call the double half rule. And this is where the subject in the foreground is either double or half the light of the background. Basically, this just increases the contrast and makes them stand out more. This is not always needed, but when you do it right, it looks so good. The next step to making your video look good is composition. Put simply, this is just where you put things in frame. Now, there's a lot to this, but we'll just follow that same basic principle. Don't distract from the main point. Let's look at some examples. Generally, there's a few rules that you want to follow. One is having a simple background. Where you can, try to contrast light or dark colors. Speaking of colors, accents are always a good idea. Most of the time, following the rule of thirds gives you a really nice look. And wherever you can, use leading lines to draw your audience into the main focus. Now, there's a lot more to this, but we will just leave it at these basic points. As far as specific camera settings go, if you are just a beginner, go ahead and just leave these on auto. It does a great job. Shaky footage tends to make the audience feel uneasy. So unless that's what you're going for, you might consider placing your camera on something stable. This could be a tripod, a little phone stand, or even a stack of books. If you absolutely do need camera movement, try to use some kind of stabilization, whether this be in camera or using something like a gimbal. Also, making sure that your footage is perfectly vertical and horizontal will go a long way in making it look more professional. Now, this can be very hard to do if you're just eyeballing it. So try turning on the rule of thirds grid on your phone or camera. This will make it much easier. And lastly, focal length and background blur. Now, focal length is how wide or tight your shot is, and this can greatly affect how the face looks. Generally, you want to stick between 50 and 100 millimeter. This makes the face look best. And always try to avoid going below 35 millimeter. This ends up just warping the face. Now, as far as changing the blur in a background, this can be done by adjusting the aperture or the f-stop. Many entry-level DSLRs can do this, and some modern cell phones can simulate it, such as the portrait mode from iPhone. Usually, a blurry background is more emotional, whereas a focused background is more informative. Do you want to lead the eye of your viewer? Try something called a focus pull, which is where your focus moves from one point to another. Now, of course, you want to be creative, so test different shots, different angles, different takes, but get those figured out before you hit record. Next, we're going to talk about audio. Now, in many ways, good audio is actually more important than good video. Sometimes when the audience sees lower quality video, they'll pass it off, saying it's just a creative choice. Whereas low quality audio will come across as not professional. The audience won't take you serious and they will be distracted. Again, we don't want to distract from the main point. How do we get good quality audio? Let's focus on 3 points. If you're working on a very low budget, it's okay. Phone quality audio is actually adequate. But if you would like to elevate your production a little bit more, there's some very affordable options I have in the description below. In fact, this mic that I'm using right now is found there. Here's 3 main options. The first is a shotgun mic. This points at the subject and is really great for interviews. The next is a lapel mic. This clips onto the subject and is great when the subject is small in frame. And third, we have the desktop mic. This sits in front of the subject and is great for when you're filming on a webcam. Now for this production, I used a shotgun mic, but in others, I've actually ended up using all 3. If you'd like to see what I use, check the description below. The next step to good audio is room treatment. This is basically where you get rid of reverb, or that little echo that you hear when a room is too empty. Even a really good quality microphone will sound terrible if the room treatment is not done properly. Everyday items like rugs, pillows, blankets, really anything soft will dampen the sound and get rid of most of the reverb. Also, be sure to turn off anything that is making noise. Even if it might sound soft in your ears, the mic can still pick it up. And lastly, hydration. If your voice is raspy or your tongue is smacking, again, this is distracting. Drink 2 or 3 glasses of water 20 minutes before filming to get rid of that. Here's mine. Well, your pre-production is done, your filming is done. Now we move on to our last step, post-production. Transfer all of your clips onto your computer, watch through all of them, and then separate them into 2 folders. One, video you want to get rid of, we'll call that your burn folder, and the other, the video you want to keep. We'll call that your keep folder. After that, rename all of your keepers, and then put them inside a folder structure that is very organized and makes sense to you. A good rule of thumb is you should be able to find any clip, no matter how big or small, within 30 seconds. If you can't do that, you might want to look at how you have it organized. If you'd like a sample of a folder structure, check the link in the description below. A note about backups. Don't delete your original footage from your camera. Leave it on there as you're working on the project. Of course, keep the footage on your computer, but also put it in a third place, an external drive, or upload it to the cloud. If it's not backed up in 3 places, it's not backed up. Believe me, you do not want to get burned with this. Once your project is totally done and you've exported everything out, feel free to delete one of these backups. But it is still best to leave your footage in at least 2 places for a while longer, just in case you need it. Well, you've got all your clips organized. What software should you use? Well, there's a lot of options. If you're working on a Windows, there's the Adobe Creative Suite. If you're working on a Mac, there's things like Final Cut. But I'll just keep things really simple. Use DaVinci Resolve. There's a free version of it, so you don't have to make an investment in any more expensive options. If you really like DaVinci, there's a Pro version, which is a one-time payment. It's very feature-rich, and things such as color grading, which is basically where you take the colors in your footage and make them look better, are very user-friendly. And DaVinci is not sponsoring this in any way. We just really like using it. Now, as far as the specific process of editing your video, it's kind of hard for me to explain that because it's different per person and per video. But some basic rules to go by are just pick your best clips, drop those in, and then every 7 to 10 seconds, cut to something else, whether that be B-roll or a different angle of your subject. This keeps things interesting, keeps the viewers engaged, and keeps focusing on the main point. As far as transitions go, this is something that depends on you and your personal style, but usually jump cuts work best. This is where you're on one clip and you jump to another without any time in between. If you want to move on to a more advanced transition, usually the more simple it is, the more professional it looks. And if you want to get super fancy, well, this really has to be planned in the pre-production stage. Now, a simple way to edit your dialogue is do a noise reduction, and then raise the volume. Now be careful, don't do too much noise reduction, otherwise it kind of sounds robotic. As far as music and sound effects go, we use artlist.io. Now they are not sponsoring us, honestly we just love them. Their music sounds great. If you want to take a look, link in the description below. with music and sound effects, really less is more. Again, we don't want to distract from the main point. We want to add to it. We can do this by not changing music unless there's a really good reason to. We don't want to give the audience emotional whiplash. Also, using too many sound effects can come across as unprofessional, so we want to be careful with that too. Now that you're done editing your project, you're ready to deliver it or render it out. Render this out in full frame, and then, depending on whatever platform you're going to put it on, take that final video and trim it down to whatever size and length you need. Now, there's a lot of different ways to export your footage, but we'll just give you a simple outline. If you record it in 4K and you need 4K, export in 4K. If you don't absolutely need it though, export in 1920 by 1080. Render this out as an MP4 and you'll be set. And that's it, you're done. Now your video is ready to be released to the world. I know as a beginner, this can all seem kind of overwhelming, but don't worry. We've put together all of these basic steps into a very simple, easy to follow guide. You can find that in the description below. Yes, video editing can be overwhelming, but as we've seen in this video, there is a very simple formula to follow. And through practice, you'll get better and better, faster and faster, and eventually you'll learn your style. Need to edit on the go? Watch this video where I review the Dash Pro from Oyen Digital. Do you need beginner to intermediate gear suggestions? Check the links in the description below for a lot of things that I personally use. Did these tips help? Do you have any other questions? Have any before and afters you want to show me? Fantastic, I'd love to see them. Reach out to me in the comments section or on Instagram. Until next time, see you later.